I've got questions from members of the public that have been tabled. We'll go through those at the end. I've got 5 there, so there's quite a bit to get through, and I've got the answers ready for those. Just by way of any of the welcomes or apologies, so I've got apologies from the following, which I'll read out. Alison Moon, Dave Jarrett, Dominic Agisti and Simon is attending from AWP. Joe Bailey, Joe Beer and Dominique is here from Serona. Joe Hicks, John Martin, Mark Cook, Martin Holloway and Richard Smale. Siobhan, I think Joe Walker has given an apology. Anyone else I've missed? Okay, thank you very much. Declarations of interest. Any declarations of interest the board members haven't notified us of that is relevant to today's meeting? No? Okay, thank you. Minutes of the meeting in May. Any points on the minutes before I move to actions? No? Thank you very much. There's only one action on there for Shane around out of area placements. Shane?
Yeah, so at the last meeting, Aisha, you'd asked the question about would we start reporting them as a overall system rather than individual BNSSG in Gloucestershire. We haven't done that yet, okay, and there are conversations about how we will report performance. So we haven't. We have both of them, but as of yet, we haven't actioned that into a new performance report. Okay. I can, when we do action, obviously, have a joint report. It will be joint, but it hasn't been actioned yet.
Thank you. Anything else by way of comments on the actions? No? Great. Shane, over to you then, CEO's update.
Thank you, Chair. So as always, 3 big things. The first one is about organisational change. The second one is about neighbourhood health, and I want to major on that as part of the update, and I have majored on it in the document. And then preparing for merger. So I'm not going to read it line by line. I'm just going to pull out some important things. In terms of organisational change, the board will be aware from the closed session, but it's important to have an open as well, that we are on target to meet our organisational change deadline, which is with regards to having the new organisational populated by September. So we're on target for the September deadline. And that's really important because if we don't get people in the post, we can't build the new organisation and we can't deliver to our purpose. So we're on target for that, so Chair. You will see in the paper reference to both clinical leadership model and services closing. More than happy to take questions on that, Chair, if the time is appropriate. What I want to draw the board's attention to was a very large gathering we had actually in this room about 2 weeks ago on the neighbourhood health national visit. So as you know, the national team, in this particular case, Dr. Claire Fuller and other members of her team, are travelling the country to visit integrated care systems to understand and both BNSSG partners, the system, etc., with over 80 people. And we're exploring where we've got to in neighbourhood health. And there's been a really important programme of work on in the whole of the cluster. Read through all the bits, but there was particular things from Bristol, so BNSSG from Gloucestershire, etc. But if I can draw the board's attention to what is page 31 in Diligent, which is basically, I think, a summary of the key questions and queries that were raised at the end of the day. So having heard all the things we were doing, have we quite got this right? And by the way, the national team were very complimentary. It sort of reminds me of the Morecambe and Wise joke. You have all the pieces, you're not in the right order. Okay, so what they were saying, you've got all the pieces. Start to think about how you bring it together. So you can see there at the bottom of that page, Chair, there were 6 real, I think, challenges put back into the room. The first one was about focus and prioritization. In other words, at cluster level, at system level, and at place level, are we really certain about the high impact cohorts we're going after? Okay, so we've talked a lot about frailty, all age frailty. And the challenge, I think, that went out to both, to many people, but to the acute and also to one carer in BNSSG as one of our leaders in the work we're trying to do, have we got the business model quite right? If we invest £7 million over there, can you guarantee it's going to change the way demand flows and makes a difference? So that was a big challenge put out to us. Have we got that model right? The second big area was outcomes and benefits. And they were sort of saying, look, just understand the value of this work you're trying to do. And actually, a lot of it came back to the comments you often make, Joe, about healthcare and healthcare and health. Drive X look at improving the overall health of the population. Be certain which parts are going to do what. Because in some cases the ICB will lead, but in other cases they'll partner with the Health and Wellbeing Board, etc. Just be certain you understand who's doing what. The third bit was about data and segmentation. It is very clear in our cluster we have pockets of brilliant data that are being used. The question was, do we have it everywhere? Can we use it everywhere? And can we really get into patient-level predictive data? And I think it's a very fair question, and one that we as a new ICB are challenged with. We've got some great stuff, but can we bring up the kind of, I use it as an extreme, but it's that kind of real use of data. The fourth one was governance. So our decisions, rights, accountability, and risk appetite really fully understood, and do we have the right neighbourhood structure in terms of governance to make that work? The fifth one was scale and spread. We've got some brilliant stuff that's happening, but it's not happening everywhere. And what do we want to do? So we heard a lot that day about frailty, presentation about frailty in Tewkesbury. It wasn't just about Tewkesbury, but they focused in on that bit. And we could begin to see the connection between the work that was being done and a genuine shift in demand and where the demand was appearing. The question is, if we've got it in one place, why can't it be everywhere, was the challenge. And it's a real challenge. I don't think lift and shift always works, different communities. Tewkesbury is not the same as inner city East Bristol. It's not the same as Weston-super-Mare, but the logic might hold true. Are we applying that? And then the final bit was financial sustainability. We are putting money in through various funds, through a neighbourhood fund. We're putting money into the MOU in Gloucestershire. So we're putting money in, and that's really important. But how does that money in turn into actual transformation, recurrent funding? How do we make the business model work? So it was really helpful, Jeff, and I think it's helped to just realign our system approach to neighbours. I think the message was some really good stuff in places, get the governance right, and get this really good stuff to be across the cluster. So very, very helpful. And then the final bit, Jeff, to bring to the meeting today is our preparing for merger. So the board will be aware that we are obviously clustered at the moment, and NHSE's timetable to begin with was that we would merge by April. You also know, as a result of the papers I brought to this board, is that we were asked for to engage with our partners to identify whether the boundary we had was coterminous with combined authority, and if not, would we still move forward? And as you know, Chair, the decision of the board was exactly that, to put a response to NHSE, which said, actually, we are going to merge as Gloucestershire BNSSG, even though we know it is not aligned with the combined authority, and we will deal with the challenges and complications that brings. But from a patient flow perspective, from a two strong ICBs coming together, it was the right thing to do. So as a result of that, we have now put a program in place to look at technical merger. It's not the cultural merger. It's not trying to understand how we work together. It's a technical piece of work that helps to understand our finance systems working together, our HR systems working together, two ledgers becoming one, all of the technical stuff of coming together. We've kicked that off, and we've created a merger due diligence oversight group that will report into the transition committee. So, Chair, really happy to take thoughts, comments and questions on any part of it. But I think for me, the big part of that is the neighbourhood work and how we use this to really bounce forward and drive.
Okay, thanks, Shane. I know a lot of people were there for this session with Claire Fuller, but just from my observation, I had somebody prodding from outside because it just created a diff, didn't it? So I think, huge amounts of people here were at that meeting, and just it shaped it as a different conversation. So it was quite helpful, I think. Any questions for Shane? We are online and we've got. So if it's the first time you speak, could you just introduce yourself? Because online they can't probably read our name tags. So that would be helpful for our members of the public as well. So any comments or questions or observations for Stephen?
Stephen Williams, Councillor in Bristol, Chair of the Health and Wellbeing Board for the city on neighbourhood working. And we've had some discussions within Bristol about what our neighbourhoods would be, because obviously we have council wards, we have our localities, we have area committees in Bristol, Gloucestershire, South Gloucestershire and North Somerset have parishes and town councils and so on. But it looks as though the ICB is alighted on primary care networks as your definition for neighbourhood. I wonder if you could expand on why you've gone down that route.
Certainly. So from a healthcare delivery perspective, we had a conversation and approval actually through the system exec group, which is the chief executives, that we would start and build our neighbourhoods around PCNs because of the nature of the neighbourhood guidance from a health perspective was very clearly about developing integrated teams around the primary care world. So that's the decision we took. And in fact, that's the decision that was taken across the country. I think as we begin to unfold, we may end up saying that actually the important unit is maybe a multi-neighbourhood where maybe 2 or 3 PCNs come together. And you may have seen in NHSE went out to consult on new multi-neighbourhood providers and single neighbourhood provider guidance on the 16th of July. So I think what we'll end up having is neighbourhoods based around PCNs to begin with. And I think we'll end up probably having some kind of multi-neighbourhood collection, which might not be simply about PCNs. We took a pragmatic decision, which is if it's about integrated neighbourhood healthcare team to begin with, we will build it around the primary care network.
As a follow-up to that, Jeff, the localities have been attending health and wellbeing boards and sort of established way of working, certainly inside Bristol. What do you see as the future for them?
Yeah, that's part of the conversation we're having as a group. I think health and wellbeing boards are absolutely the place. In fact, they're clearly in the guidance. Health and wellbeing boards is the overall place that governs neighbourhoods. So there's no doubt about that. So our piece of work from a healthcare perspective needs to feed in to the health and wellbeing boards, of which we have 4, and that's how we've established our governance. Below that, we will have neighbourhoods. The challenge of locality. So I've been talking to locality leads about so in other words, is it 4 health and wellbeing boards, then localities, and then neighbourhoods, or should it simply transfer into health and wellbeing boards and then neighbourhoods, rather than having that level? And that's an ongoing conversation, Stephen. I don't want to introduce a level of bureaucracy and complexity by simply saying we have to hold on to our localities. Our localities were created by us as a unit, which could be quite useful. That's a conversation on board at the moment as to whether you would carry on. You take the learning from the localities, but you might transfer it into neighbourhoods.
Stephen, do you have a view on it?
Are established, and obviously there are implications for them. I wonder if it was completely clear that from what you're saying, Shane, that they are going to be taken off the table?
I think it's important that the locality resource that the ICB fund is likely to be off the table.
Right.
Okay. That does not mean that if partners in a locality wish to hold the energy, the opportunity, the sharing and learning in the locality, we're not going to stop that. And I'm really conscious that Bristol have developed thinking around the localities. So we're not saying that they disappear, but from a health care provision perspective, we are looking at neighbourhoods. And we've yet to decide how, from an ICB, we work at the locality level, but I think it would be really complex as an ICB to work at a cluster level, a health and wellbeing board level, a locality level, and a neighbourhood level. I think from an ICB perspective, we've got to be cluster. The health and wellbeing board is the architecture of place, and neighbourhood is the place that work gets done. But it's an open conversation that we're having at the moment, Stephen.
And it's not defined, so
No.
you know
It's an open
we
conversation.
do need to work it through.
Yeah.
Thanks, Ellen.
Yeah, I think my Mine is building really. So Ellen Donovan, non-exec director for the ICB board. So I think I'm building on Stephen. Pleased to see that all age frailty will be a primary lens for testing this. I was going to say, can you say a bit more about the development making framework? And I think you've partly answered that in the conversation we've just had. But if there's anything more you can say, Shane. You've said that you're going to have that in place by April 2027.
Yeah.
Any more thoughts that you can share with us on that?
So by April 2027, we need to have our commissioning intention and framework clearly up and running. We have a governance board for neighbourhoods, but we are up to looking at how that can be changed. And I do think, and I've said this numerous occasions, health and wellbeing boards are the place-based governance. But I'm not 100% certain we work closely enough with health and wellbeing boards to work out how best to develop that. So we will have to have a governance architecture that works for us to enable us to commission. And that might still come through to our executive commissioning group in the ICB. I would love to see health and wellbeing boards develop into the commissioning architecture for a population. But I think that's not that. In fact, I know that's not by April 2027. So we have an internal architecture which we'll use. I would love health and wellbeing board to commission our neighbourhood service. There really is work to be done, Chair.
Okay, thanks, Shane.
You might need to introduce yourself, Chair. That's all right.
I'm Jo Medhurst. I'm the Chief Population Health Improvement Officer. So we have got a commissioning decision architecture based on finance and SFIs. In parallel, as part of the population health work, we are looking at bringing a decision framework which allows us to do allocative commissioning. So that is the movement of resource based on need, and that needs to have a very wide range of factors to be considered against, which is about outcome benefits, ethics, legal statutory duties. So we're doing work with that. We're going to pull in our Professor of Ethics. We'll work with some of the academics in our university system. We'll work with partners to say, well, what is a framework that allows us to make the difficult decisions? And I think at the neighbourhood level, and again at some of the national things I've been at, they're very, this is our role, is to move resource around that's based on need to increase equity. It's not just about moving resource around to do sort of generalised business as usual commissioning. We're here to move resource around. We're also going to develop a decision quality tool, so that we've actually got a framework that allows us to look, have we considered all the relevant parts that drive good decision making? So that's the foundational step. Then the ethical framework, for want of a better word, to allow us to make decisions around resource allocation and allocative commissioning. And then that then feeds into the commissioning governance framework. And Kath and I spoke only yesterday about how we make sure that's two sides of the same coin. But it's work in progress, and it will take us probably 3 or 4 months, I think, to get an output.
Okay. Thanks, Joe. Any other comments, questions, or observations for Shane? No? Okay, great. Thank you very much. I'll move us on then. Thank you, Shane. Finance update, Kath.
Finance report.
Do you want to introduce yourself?
I'm sorry, Kath Leach, Chief Finance and Corporate Services Officer. So within the pack, you have the month 3.
We still can't hear.
Okay.
Turn that mic up.
Take the microphone really close to you.
So the pack contains the month 3 forecast outturn for the financial year for both organisations, and that remains as break even for both BNSSG ICB and Gloucestershire ICB. Within the position, there are quite a few risks that are emerging. They're not new risks, but they are growing for this year. So ADHD and autism assessments and ongoing treatments from a right to choose providers remain a growing, we've got growing activity and increasing associated spend. So within Gloucestershire, it's about 2.8 million is the forecast overspend as at month 3. We believe that forecast will now increase based on the trend from a recent review. We are putting in BNSS even with IAPs in place. We are those and looking to bring in activity management plans if the IAPs do not sort of have the impact we're anticipating, but it is likely, therefore, that the forecasts will increase on that, leading to an overspend. So within the organisation, we've had a recent conversation about both the contractual kind of levers that we have, but also then trying to take a step back to look at what else we need to look at within that space. We have investment in both systems, in local providers as well, to try and manage some of that. So we're going to look and see what, in the round, where do we think we are? Within BNSSG, there is a growing pressure within all age continuing healthcare. The forecast overspend is 1.6 million. Within Gloucestershire, the forecast is broadly level. We aren't seeing quite the same pressures within the Gloucestershire system. Within Gloucestershire, NHS providers, there is an overspend which is growing. That primarily relates to urgent care. We are looking at whether we have a trend, whether it's linked to the health, the increases in heat recently, whether it's a broader trend or not. That work is underway at the moment. Prescribing, at the moment, that's a forecast of break even for both organisations. However, the what's called no cheaper stock options, which is where prescribing prices are set nationally and increased due to external factors, those prices have been increasing really significantly. And whilst the prescribing savings within both organisations are very strong and will help to what we will start to look at to see manage that overspend through the year. Organisations have mitigations, non-recurrent slippage, the non-recurrent measures. So at the moment, the forecast does remain break-even. In terms of other factors with it, or other metrics within finance, so the better payment policy and the mental health investment standard and capital and running costs, we are forecasting that we will achieve those. And that's the.
Thank you,
Happy
Kat.
to take questions.
Questions or comments? I mean, but broadly, it's positive. It's good news, isn't it, as to where we are as a system. There's a variance across both systems. And Shane, I don't know whether there's anything you'd want to comment on that.
Not in the variance. I think the biggest risk of all this, from my perspective, is the ADHD, ASD, and the ability to manage expenditure in that way, despite putting considerable additional resources into that piece of work. For me, Chair, that's the biggest risk in here. We are putting indicative activity plans in place and all those kind of things. But actually, this is the one that I think, from my perspective, we have to get the biggest control on, and the board has potentially the biggest risk, Chair.
Steve?
On the ADHD piece, have we done a deep dive to understand where the demand is coming from, who the gatekeepers are in terms of referral, and then what the impact is of when that whole pathway is the pathways that are being used? What's the end outcomes of those, and what are the control systems in there? There's a lot of evidence that is anecdotal evidence about how this is working, but I think as an ICB, we probably need to do a deep dive to really understand culture and behaviour in this space, and then the outcomes. I just think there's something going on here which is quite interesting that we need to explore further.
So I'm going to start, and I don't know if some of my other colleagues, so Joe or Raghu Rosie might want to come in on that. So in terms of controls and measures, so when a provider is accredited somewhere in the country by another ICB, then patients are eligible to be referred to that provider wherever they are and wherever they've been accredited within the country. So we do have, whilst we've accredited some providers to ensure that we've got our specification and controls and what have you within there, we have to accept the referrals and the payments that go with them where patients are being referred to any of those other providers. And it is a right to choose from patients. So that is there. We are setting indicative activity plans. That is one lever that we have. It's whether it's truly effective in that way, I don't know. Basically, what that does mean is if you do that, you start to build up waiting lists and waiting times go out, and we've got a responsibility around that as well. So it's a little bit of a tricky issue in that sense. We have started to really, as a cluster, started to look at some of the gaps. One of our gaps is that the data that we get, the mandated data set, is very limited. And we are starting to define what we would like, both to try and include that within our own contracts, but also to influence NHS England, who have issued indicative guide prices for this activity, but the mandated data sets are quite limited. So we're going to try and influence in that way. So in terms of the wider conversation about where is this being driven from, I don't have an answer, but others may have different views.
I guess one of my concerns is nationally, is there a view? Are we an outlier? And then the second part is if there is an increase nationally, what is going on in terms of reviews? There are independent reviews. There are also reviews that you can Google all over the place. If you do a search, if you do a due diligence search, then you'll spot stuff. And I just wonder what grip and controls do we have that we are confident about? And then there's the national stuff, which obviously is a national issue. I'm just intrigued that this is going to run and run.
Do you want? Okay.
What I was going to reference was the work we've done in BNSSG ICB around the kind of diagnostic, which former board members from that board will remember. I think probably what you're triggering, Steve, is that we need to go back and check that, because we put a whole load of other measures in place to get early intervention for children and families through schools. A really good piece of work with our local authorities. I think it's a really good call that we then go back and maybe, Joey, we need to think about how we do that to understand, have those interventions done the thing we wanted to, which is get support to families and children much, much earlier and actually help issues they had rather than just pushing through a diagnostic pathway. So I need to go back to the fabulous work we did and then tally that against kind of what we're seeing in the IAPS.
Can I encourage people to introduce themselves when they start? But there is a variance across Gloucestershire and BNSSG. So is that work ongoing around looking at across both systems?
So we've kicked it off as a small working group across the cluster. So it's got a sort of there's a paper being drafted which Matt Backler is pulling together or coordinating, which we're going to bring to execs in terms of the work programme that we want to set out for next steps.
Ellen.
Can I just echo Steve? First of all, great paper, Kath, really clear. I think the way in which it sort of comes across. I think Steve's absolutely right. It was a point I was going to make as well. I think perhaps the committee, Finance Quality Performance Committee, and bringing those three functions is probably the right place to dive into it. And I'd welcome Steve, if you're there for that meeting, that would be fantastic. Our next meeting is September. I know there are challenges, Shane, in terms of we're still going through transition, but I think if we don't review it in September, then this could easily sort of get away from us. So I'd be really keen to have a look at this, and possibly I'm going to ask Rosie to just talk about all age continuing care, which is another area where we're overspent. I know Rosie's team did a lot of fantastic work in BNSSG last year, so just wouldn't mind a bit of an update from Rosie on whether there's a similar issue there and whether or not it's something we can look at in September as well.
Jane, do you want to go first?
In terms of the committee, we'll bring the paper to execs in the next couple of weeks, and more than happy that paper is scrutinised through the committee, more than happy. We haven't seen it yet, so we need to understand the process. I know Matt as Deputy Chief Finance Officer, has been working closely with service, with Dave's teams as well. I'm more than happy the committee, whether that's September, I can't promise you that because I haven't seen the work yet.
Okay, no problem.
Rosie, do you want to come in?
So I come on the... So Rosie Shepherd, Chief Clinical Leadership and Delivery Officer for Nursing. In terms of all age continuing care, what we can see is a rise in referral rates into the service, probably about 25%, but we need to get underneath it and understand what's happening there. And our conversion rate from referral to receiving a package of care has stayed the same. So, of course, if we get more people coming to us and the conversion rate stays the same, then the cost of care will go up. So the team are unpicking it at the moment, and we'll work with Kath's team around the finance and bring something through with more detail. But we are definitely seeing a change in presentation to the service and therefore an increase in expenditure at the moment.
Thanks, Rosie.
Thanks, Rosie. Joe?
This is a population health team. We won't be at the second team, I think, until mid-September, Ellen. So the people that could do some of the very deep dive work around
You need to go a bit closer to the microphone, I think, Joe.
around data, we won't have people in place till mid-September. So we can do it, and we can do some of the high-level work around contractual here and now. But the question you asked, Steve, about what are the causal factors, what's the variation, what is happening here, unless we change our priorities, which we've agreed as part of the integrated needs assessment, including frailty, we can change those priorities, but we do have to be very mindful of the fact that the resources we have are now limited and we can't do everything all at the same time. So we can do it later in the year or we can change our priority, but we just need to be thoughtful about, we can't just keep adding data requests into a smaller data team because we won't be able to achieve.
And I think that's important. However, it's really important we always have come in with sort of really good finances at the end of it. And if we don't look at certain areas, I'm not sure we need to a full deep dive in extreme detail, but it's an area that we probably need to have a look at to be confident as a board that we can come in on budget for the end of the year.
Okay.
Just a bit profiling that might need to happen.
Thanks, Joe. I've got Aisha and then Kevin. Can you introduce yourself, Aisha? Thanks, Kevin.
Can you hear me? Yeah, Aisha Jan, the ICB. So I just wanted to go back to the ADHD conversation. There was a national ADHD task force which reported about a year ago. It's got some great recommendations. Just be really good to look at it. And in that report, it does say clinician defined ADHD is underdiagnosed, undertreated, etc. So this problem isn't going to go away necessarily. Just from anecdotal experience, I think the long waiting lists are creating health inequalities. We're seeing people who can afford it going completely private, not even down the right to choose road. So we are creating significant health inequalities. If we do change how we're doing the service, we might find we're then inundated with people who would previously have accessed this service via their own funds. So I think it requires some real long-term thinking on this, and sort of thinking about those national recommendations and how we might align with them as well.
Okay, thanks, Aisha. Useful to incorporate. Ellen. Kevin.
Thank you, Chair. I'm Kevin. I'm the CEO of the Care Forum. I'm here on behalf of Healthwatch, BNSSG and Gloucestershire. I guess just to bring some lived experience to the discussion around ADHD, and I thought the report looked really good. It was really well laid out and really clear to people like myself. Over the course of the last 18 months, we've worked with people across communities in BNSSG and Gloucestershire, specifically around neurodivergency, and consistently they tell us that it is about misunderstanding around right to choose pathways, information, advice and guidance isn't clear, it's complicated, and that in the main people would really value support, peer-led support from community groups. And so for me, when we're unpicking some of these pathways and governance processes, actually our people using these services are telling us what would make their experience more straightforward. And it might actually lower the instances of people needing to access statutory services if the support in the community through third sector organisations is already in place.
Thank you, Kevin. Any other comments or questions? Okay, Kath, thanks very much. I reiterate that really clear paper, really straightforward, and thank you for your efforts on it. Brilliant. Okay, let me move us on to committee updates then. First of all, Steve, audit.
Thank you, Chair. So Steve West, Chair of Audit. We've had 2 audit and risk committee meetings, one for Gloucestershire, one for BNSSG. We received strong assurance across internal audit, external audit, financial reporting, counter fraud. Internal audit issued a positive annual opinion, and external audit provided unqualified audit opinion with no significant governance, regulatory or value for money concerns identified. And that applies to both organisations. We had separate meetings for both. The annual accounts, annual report and internal audit plan were approved and the letter of representation approved and signed. So that looks back over the previous year. The committee it is focusing on what we need to do now during this transition period into next April. There are a number of areas that are common across both organisations during a period of significant change. And I'd first like to say that the teams that worked to create the papers and the accounts and audit for the June meetings did a fantastic job. Both sets of teams really worked very effectively with internal audit teams and external audit, and created some really, really powerful documents and a view of what we did and what we achieved over that year. So big thanks to everybody concerned. The areas that we will want to keep an oversight of as we go forward, under 2 or 3 headings really. Risk management. During periods of change, one of the things that we're very cognizant of is that we're bringing new people together. So how we ensure that risk management practices across all of the directorates are common and similar is going to be important. We've adopted a new cluster risk management framework and a board assurance framework. They're designed to strengthen overall our governance and create that more consistent approach across directorates, both within BNSSG and Gloucestershire. And we're going to monitor that over the next period just to make sure that it's being implemented and we're adopting good organisational learning across both. Cybersecurity nationally remains a high risk for all organisations, NHS included, and all of our partners will be very familiar with the risks that they're carrying. So again, a general statement really around how we ensure that we continue to invest in cybersecurity, recognising the financial constraints, that we've got staff awareness, and that we're doing the normal things that we should be doing for phishing simulations, incident responses, planning and system resilience. All of those things within our partners are happening, and within the ICB as we come together need to continue. And then making sure that we give further consideration to Cybersecurity Operations Centre and how we work with those effectively. We're also tracking, obviously, from last year into this year, historic audit actions that need to be followed through. So we're looking at those to make sure that they're closed down, and then also looking at rationalising and prioritising actions as we go into the new cluster, because old actions may no longer apply. So wasting time on that won't be helpful. And then considering and supporting the continued harmonisation of governance, assurance and risk arrangements across the 2 ICBs, and learning from best practice in both parts. And then finally, the overall committee view. The committee concluded that the organisations remain in a strong control environment despite significant organisational change. And I'd like to pay tribute to all staff who have, in a very difficult period, really focused down to make sure that the organisations are safe and effective. And that's down to hard work. And that as we embed the new risk management framework, as we strengthen cyber resilience, that's a national issue that we're all very familiar with and aware of. And as we close down and adopt new practices, that we're alive to the potential risks associated with that. That's covers both, I think, 15th and 16th.
Comprehensive. Any questions for Steve? Okay, great. Thank you very much. Jane, over to you. I'll allow you to introduce your committee.
Thank you. Hi, Jane Cummings, one of the joint NEDs, and I chair the SHIP committee, which I think, if I get this right, stands for, I'm going to get this wrong. Strategic Health Inequalities, Population Health, Population Management and Commissioning, roughly. That's sort of, it basically covers a lot. We've met once, and at that meeting, one of the first things we did was review the terms of reference and the membership. We felt it was really important that we had an opportunity to discuss with the membership of that committee whether we should expand it, and also and just to confirm what it was there to do. And Joe is the senior executive that supports that committee. And we've talked about the need to improve much more detail around the commissioning cycle in those terms of reference. So that's really clear. That we look at integrated health needs assessment, we look at the outcomes framework, we have the strategic commissioning priorities, and we also oversee the neighbourhood health programme. So we talked about that. We also discussed the membership, and we did a review of the previous committees that were in place across the ICBs. They were very different between Gloucestershire and BNSSG, but we had some really useful feedback from people that were part of the previous committee, we've taken the learning from that to help develop what we're doing. The options for partner members as ongoing members of that committee, whether there may be certain items of the agenda that they may need to come in on. And we also looked at how we particularly focus on race equity and the need to improve that. We reviewed the health and equality statements. NHS England have requested a particular type of health and equality statement, which is slightly different from the way the two ICBs had previously written them. So we reviewed what had been written, and there was a commitment to update that later in the year. And that will probably either come back to next meeting or the one after that. We also looked at our potential work plan. There is, with all of our committees, the opportunity to do quite a lot, but there's also a risk that we do too much and not do it effectively. So we wanted to make sure that between the various different committees that we've got, or the three main ones, that we actually have an opportunity to cover everything that the ICB is accountable and responsible for. But that we don't duplicate, because obviously that with reduced workforce, we need to make sure we make the best use of people's time and that we actually do things that are particularly effective. So we've looked at future agendas, we've looked at the breadth of work that we want to do, scheduling future agenda planning. Focused on was reviewing public health expertise. We determined that we would have two directors of public health on the committee. The view from the 4 directors of public health we have across the cluster was that they all wanted to be involved, and because of the level of expertise that they bring, particularly when we've already heard Joe talk about the need to look at real health need allocative efficiency. Where do we actually focus our funding? We've agreed that all 4 should be involved in that, and we will continue to develop an initiative way how that membership of that committee develops. So that was just a sort of scoping and setting out committee. I think the next one in September there'll be a lot more detail, and I look forward to reporting back on that in the future. Joe, is there anything you wanted to add?
You covered my list that I wrote down. So.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you, Jeff.
Just on that point for board members on membership, I have spoken to your chairs, and for most of you in here, it's not a one-size-fits-all for the committees, so there will be a different need. So I think Jane's articulated that well about the need within the SHIP committee, but that might be different. So people committee is probably going to be much more internally focused. The one thing I've asked chairs to do is make sure that if we're asking partner members, whether they be exec or non-exec, to be part of the committees, that it adds value to you as organisations, not just the ICB. So we need to work through if it's valuable for their time and for the committee's time, then it makes sense to have involvement. But we don't just want to throw an open blanket of invites out there, because I know how busy you all are anyway. Okay, thanks, Jane. Any questions or comments for Jane or for Joe? No, thanks very much. Ellen.
Thanks, Joe. So I'm Ellen Donovan, Chair of Finance, Quality and Performance Committee. We met on the 26th of June. We looked at 3 key areas: our terms of reference, the finance report, and also the National Oversight Framework, which is called the NOF. Just to update you, we are establishing a rhythm. It's a wide-ranging committee, so believe that it will take some time. But what's important about the committee is that its role is in oversight and assurance and not direct performance management. So we're establishing that at the moment. We're also working to clarify our relationship with NHS England, which is really important. I'll come back to that in a second. On finance, colleagues will see the finance report, which we've just gone through with Kath. Papers are very thorough and I think really well presented. So I think that's really good. June position is similar to May. We've got 3 risks which we've identified: ADHD and autism, all age continuing care, and then in Gloucestershire, the higher acute activity in the independent sector. So ADHD and autism I'm keen to have a look at in September committee, which we've already rehearsed. I'd also like to remind the board, or to introduce to the board, the National Oversight Framework. I'm sure that at some point in the future we'll introduce that as a board agenda, Shane. But based on the metrics, the ICB will be placed in one of 4 segments, 1 or 2 being very good, and 3 and 4 ideally, not so good, with increased oversight. And a financial deficit will cap us at segment 3. So really important that finances are really kept, and our committee will keep an eye on that area. I met Tom and Anna from Business Intelligence in the week, who were fantastic and have produced some great reports and operational plan, and they're doing the same thing for the National Oversight Framework. And I've also had some time with Caroline from Dave Jarrett's team on the move that she and the team are making from performance through to strategic commissioning. So that work is underway. The position between the region and ICB on oversight is developing, I'd say. And I think there's still a lot of demands on the ICB that we might have thought would have moved. So I think we need to keep an eye on that area. That's it for now, Jen.
Thanks, Helen. I'll bring Shane in a second on that point around performance management. But is there anything exec members want to add? So, Rosie, Joe, Raghu?
And just to add that, I think for this committee, we've got Kath, Rosie, Raghu and Dave, who are key directors feeding into this committee. But I think just in our ADHD and autism conversation, it shows the benefit of actually bringing performance and quality and finance together.
Yeah, that's right. And absolutely right. The thing we warned against is making sure that agenda doesn't get so swell that you're unable to shine a light on things. I mean, that's really important.
Yeah, we would. Yeah.
Shane, do you want to just come on the conversation we've had with the region?
Yeah, so chairs and chief executives of the 3 ICBs in the southwest met with the region to look at a number of things. One in particular was oversight and performance management. Yeah. And you are correct, Ellen, it is still evolving, but it is very clear. So the National Oversight Framework exists for providers, but also will exist for commissioners. The management of that oversight process for providers is not the responsibility of the ICB. I think that's really important. Okay, so oversight of providers is an NHSE function. But what clearly they will do is that they will pull us into those meetings if there are things that, from our contractual perspective, would add value to those meetings. Okay, so what we have asked is that, well, that's fine, because I think it makes a lot of sense. So a provider is in, say, NOF 3, which is, as Ellen described there. 3 is a level of oversight of that organisation, and therefore for NHSE to be armed with all the information to do good oversight, they absolutely happening in the contractual world, etc. But if on or NOF 2, the probability of us being pulled into those conversations is fairly slender, because ultimately the oversight that NHSE will bring will be quite light touch. So it's sort of a variable model of involvement. Where the NOF framework is really important for this board moving forward is we are held to account as an ICB for our position against the commissioning NOF framework. Now, that hasn't existed until now. The framework has been produced. There are 42 indicators, but I think it could be 44 now, but let me just double check that, of indicators that we will be measured against as an ICB. And there is no doubt, Ellen, that committee, your committee, needs to be looking at those and saying, are we as an ICB fit for purpose? And I think it's a good thing that we have now an oversight framework that looks at us, because often the evaluation from NHSE of us as an ICB has been narrative and qualitative in nature, okay? Whereas this brings a quantitative approach to whether we are doing the right thing for our population. It is NHSE's intention to produce the first set of data against that framework in September. I say intention because I haven't had anything formally that says it will start in September, but in conversations they've talked about the first will be in September. I imagine that that first one will be much like the provider one that was about a year ago, where everyone said, doesn't look like me. I think a lot of people did that with the first round of NOF, and therefore we may look at the results and say, no, it doesn't quite feel right. So I think there's a process we'll have to go through, Chair, but it will be published. So like the providers, it's published on a website so anyone can see how a provider is performing. Any member of the public will be able to go on and see how we are doing against the NOF framework.
Okay, thanks, Shane. I mean, it was a useful conversation with the regional director and her team. One of the things that we raised, not concerns about, but a challenge was what is commissioning and delivery against a contract and what is performance management. So it could be very easy that stuff gets moved to us for what is probably a performance management issue when actually it gets dressed up as it's a commissioning issue. So the consistency on that is going to be really important, or otherwise, as Shane said, we end up in we want to try and make sure we get consistency across the Southwest and how we do that.
And one final point, sorry, a really important part of this oversight are provider boards, because also they are the people holding themselves to account. And I think that's really important as well. And that came strongly through the discussion. It shouldn't be for an ICB or even for NHSE to be performance management. The board itself performance manages the organisation. I think that's really well understood in providers. It shouldn't, So I think that was also a really good reflection that it's not for other people to performance manage organisations. The organisations themselves own themselves and do so very well in most cases.
Absolutely. Rosie?
My observation was just about the fact that the quality assurance and oversight in escalation still sits with the ICB, though.
That's correct. Yeah.
So there is, as you say, there's still that nuance space. Still, I have professional accountability for the quality of NHS provided services across our clustered ICB. Fortunately, we always work in great collaboration with NHS England, so we kind of do things in parallel most of the time. But you're right, it's quite nuanced still. Some things have changed and some things haven't. So just for board awareness for that.
I mean, we had a good conversation with them about who's got what, so that things don't slip through the cracks, but we need to watch that quite carefully, so to make sure things don't. But I know Ellen will be all over that. So, any other comments or questions? Ellen's committee? No? Okay. I know you haven't met yet with the People Committee, but anything to update?
Developing a board plan, which will be standing items around workforce. Obviously, the committee is very much focused on internal people and transformation, so moving away from that system-wide approach we might have had, so very much internally focused, looking at workforce KPIs. But we also want to build in the ability to have some deep dives where we will be able to bring in partner people, directors and others, so we can do work collaboratively with our partners.
Okay, thanks, Aisha. Any questions for Aisha? So just finally on committees, we haven't got it on the list, but Transition Committee, which is chaired by myself, has all the exec members and non-execs there and partner members. That's to oversee the change that we are going through at the moment. I think James updated really on his update on organisational change and preparing for merger, which covers most of that. But that group has the opportunity to dig into a bit more detail before things are escalated up to the board. So I don't think there's anything more to add on it at the moment, is there? But just so members of the public are aware. Okay, thank you, everyone. I'll move on to questions from members of the public. I think the first two I've got, I'm not sure that the members of the public are here, but I'll go to the exec member just to do a very short précis of what the question is, and then we've done a full written response which will be sent out to people, so they will have a written copy. So question one was around postural orthostatic tachycardia syndrome, POTS. Raghu, it might help to explain what that is for members of the public, because actually when we have mnemonics or abbreviations, normally when you read out the full name it helps, but I'm not sure that's massively helped. But Raghu, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. Ananthakrishnan Raghavan, Chief Medical Officer. Postural orthostatic tachycardia syndrome. Normally, when we all stand up, our blood pressure goes up so that the blood gets to the brain. And therefore, we're able to maintain circulation. In these patients, the blood pressure drops. And when the blood pressure drops, the heart tries to work harder and it pumps harder. And that's the tachycardia bit. And it's very disabling. So the question here is, what work is the NHS Gloucestershire Integrated Care Board currently undertaking to develop or improve pathways for patients with postural orthostatic tachycardia syndrome and the related autonomic disturbances regarding access to appropriate compression garments, prescribing guidance, assessment by appropriately trained clinicians? So I will go to the response and So thank you for the question, for raising these important issues regarding the pathways and access to care for patients with postural orthostatic tachycardia syndrome. We recognize the challenges that are faced by these patients who are living with these conditions and appreciate the opportunity to review our local system, how our local system can better support them. We have sought clinical and operational input from the relevant professionals across our system. Initial inquiries indicate that this is a highly specialized area and there is currently no single recognized local expert able to provide definitive guidance on compression garment requirements, prescribing standards, or specialist assessment pathways for autonomic disorders such as POTS. To ensure our response is accurate and aligned with the national best practice, we are now seeking further specialist advice and reviewing national guidance. Based on the information available so far, there is no indication for immediate risk or requirement to change current practice. However, we acknowledge the concerns you have raised regarding the access to appropriate compression garments, including waist-high or abdominal compression, the suitability of the current lower limb compression formulary for patients with autonomic disorders, the variation in access to specialist measuring and fitting expertise, including lymphedema services, and the need for assessment by clinicians with appropriate training in autonomic dysfunction. So what are we going to do? As part of our next steps, the ICB is planning over the next 6 to 12 months to look and review the adult compression guidelines. That prescribing and lymphedema pathways adequate for patients with POTS and related autonomic disorders. So this will include examining the formulary, considering whether additional guidance is required, and exploring how specialist expertise can be accessed or strengthened within the system.
Okay, thanks, Raghu. Ryan, can I just check if that who asked that question? Who? So, I can't hear you.
Sorry, that was from a patient based in Gloucestershire, Victoria.
And they're not with us today, are they? So perhaps we can make sure that that response is emailed back out to them. Yeah, great. Okay, thanks, Ryan. The second question is around whether the ICB has an unscheduled care coordination hub. Shane, I think you were going to cover that. And again, Ryan, can I just check that the person who asked that question isn't with us today?
So it specifically says coordination hub and quite clearly across the two systems. Combinations of doing so. So at the present time, the ICB does not have an individual unscheduled care coordination hub in place. However, the development of enhanced urgent and emergency care UEC form part of our overall strategy, and work is currently under with key partners and stakeholders to explore a single coordination of unscheduled care service. A scoping exercise is scheduled for September, which will consider the potential role, benefits, and feasibility of introducing a single coordination hub model within the local health and care system. The ICB is aware of the positive outcomes reported in other areas where they have had this, including the reduction in UEC attendances, etc. The forthcoming scoping work will therefore review relevant evidence and best practice to determine whether a similar approach could support the local UEC objectives and improve patient flow.
Okay, thank you, Shane. And again, Ryan, if you can make sure that's sent out to the person who sent them in. But Bren, the last 3 questions are yours. The first one is around maternity services for Black and Asian minority ethnic communities. The second is around allocating resources to the voluntary and community sector. And the final one is around addressing health and social care inequalities. We've got a full written response on them. Perhaps if I just pass to you first of all, is there anything you particularly want to cover on those 3 questions before I pass to the exec members?
Yeah, thanks. Yeah. Thanks for all that. So thank you for demonstrating I think for me, it's a case of we are doing things around this area. What I'm not picking up as much is where are our impacts on that. So it's never to say that we're not doing any work in this area. That's important to say, and that would be important for the people circle. What is not as tangible is the feeling of the impact of this at a local level. I'm not sure that helps, but that probably summarizes the questions.
Okay, thanks, Bren. Let me go to the 3 exec members who've done the responses. We could talk all day on all 3 items, I would think. So I'm just saying to exec members, can they make sure that you précis enough so the members of the public online can hear it, but Bren will get a full written response. So Rossi, first of all, on maternity.
Thank you, Brennan. A really, really important question. And the majority of the answer is focused on what we've done in the BNSSG system. But what we will be doing now, we've clustered, is bringing the 2 local maternity and neonatal systems together. And we will use it absolutely as a place to harness clinical leadership around improving outcomes for our women, families and the children in our maternity services. We have taken part in a piece of work with the Race and Health Observatory in the NHS. I think you know this because you're there, aren't you? And we focused in the BNSSG system on preterm birth and improving outcomes for women and children in the preterm birth. In terms of your question about outcomes, what we can see already from that work is that we have better compliance with the treatment pathway. And it's really significant improved compliance for our mums who are Black and from the Asian groups. What we will then need to see is then has that had an outcome, an improved outcome for those babies, and we will follow that through. So in terms of impact and outcomes, yes, from that work, we can see an improved compliance already. As we bring the 2 LMNSs together, we will make sure that learning covers Gloucestershire as well. We're also working in terms of understanding our impact on a system-wide intelligence dashboard, and we've agreed to focus on maternity first as the first piece of work on that. We've all seen the report, and we know that we need to be absolutely sure about our outcomes for women and children through our maternity services, and that's what our dashboard will do for us. It will also help us prioritise those with the highest need or the worst outcomes to make sure, going back to Joe's piece about allocative commissioning, that we may well need to do allocative commissioning around maternity services to get us the best outcome for all our families. So that work is underway at the moment. You'll also know we've targeted really focused energy around the Black Maternity Matters programme in partnership with the HIN. We have consistently carried on funding that programme, and it's going to have a focus on perinatal mental health going forward. Again, because we know that our women from the majority do not access our mental health services in the same way that we would wish them to. So we're targeting that at the moment. And the HIM will carry on working with us to make sure we understand the impact of the Black Maternity Matters programme. They evaluate it regularly, and then they bring that back to the LMNS so they can make sure that we're understanding how that improves the experience and outcomes of care for our women. We have a policy plan for BNSSG, and we've just done a joint need for the Gloucestershire system. That will help us again focus where we should take priorities for our maternity pathways. And as we repeat that cycle, we'll then be able to understand the impact that we're having. And then really importantly, in terms of experience of care, we have our maternity and neonatal voices partnerships, both in Gloucestershire and BNSSG. They are absolutely focused on gaining the voice of our women and people using our maternity services and making sure we get that experience feedback through, as well as the outcome feedback.
bit more formal in the response, Brendan. I'll send it to you, but I think that probably summarises. Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Rosie. Kath, there's a lot in the response to VSE, so you can.
Okay. So the next question is, what risk stratification does the cluster board adopt when allocating resources to the voluntary and community sector? What robust evidence does the board have to understand and have assurance that this is value for money, and any declarations of interest and conflicts of interest are robustly recorded and addressed? So we have a full commitment to ensuring that any public resource and any investment across all sector, including the VCSE, are allocated fairly, transparently, and in accordance with our governance arrangements. So our investment decisions will take into account strategic priorities, evidence of health inequalities, local needs assessment, and the intended outcomes of the any funding programmes. So that enables us to target investment and resources based on our priorities and greatest needs. We have a range of governance processes within the ICBs, and depending on the nature and the value of the investment, we will follow the appropriate governance structure. Depending on that value, that may go to committee and to board, or if it's a lower value, it will go through to executives. So in terms of our relationship with the VCSE across the cluster, so we have developing arrangements across both ICBs. So within Gloucestershire, the VCSE partnership model is seeking to move beyond a shared traditional transactional relationship towards one which is more based on shared purposes, transparency and collective accountability for improving outcomes within the Gloucestershire communities. And within the VCSE, within BNSSG, there's a work to build on system and sector strengths, a test and learn pilot, which is currently in progress. And this has been co-designed with the VCSE Alliance and system partners to test the robust, proportionate and equitable approach to quality assurance and generating innovative proposals for delivery in neighbourhoods and community. So in terms of assurance, the board will receive assurance through the governance processes in place, which include committees, alongside regular financial programme monitoring and reporting. There is also an evaluation framework which is in development. We have both of those for existing ICBs, but we're developing that jointly further. And in terms of governance, so we have, as two clustered ICBs, both have standards of business conduct policies, which include conflicts of interest policies. These are being brought together. They are very similar already. They take account of the NHS England statutory guidance, which includes registers of interest throughout the organisation and the active management of conflicts of interest within every single meeting, and including where we have decision-making processes, ensuring that we exclude relevant individuals as appropriate. This applies to all decisions, whether it's NHS providers, local authority, VCSE, and so on. In terms of oversight, the audit committee is the committee responsible for managing that oversight and reporting, and that oversight also includes an oversight of the mandatory training that all staff are obliged to undertake. In terms of committees of the board and the board themselves, we have a register of interest for each committee. So that's regularly updated and is reviewed at each committee.
Okay, thank you, Kath. Bren, I'll bring you back in at the end if you've got any other observations. The final question, I think probably Jane and Joe have covered during the meeting today, actually, around addressing health and social care inequity, but Joe.
Yes, no, thank you for the question, Bren. It was actually quite thought-provoking. So as you heard, we have set up a subcommittee of the board, the SHIPC committee, and a lot of the questions you asked will be looked at there. The question you did ask there was about public accountability at board level, and that did trigger me to think about how we do that. So as I sort of reviewed the question and looked at the answer, there were some areas I think we will need to bring to board after review at the agenda. What are the key areas we might want to look at? Our Health Inequalities Performance Pack, in the way we have a quality pack, commissioning performance pack. I think we need a Health Inequalities and Equity pack, and I've drafted something that I'll present to Jane and the committee at the next meeting September. We are starting to look at this. Our first step, which is a national must-do, is an integrated needs assessment. That work is in train, and that will be presented across the September period. So that's our baseline. But the accountability and public accountability, I think we can evolve and design, and I've put that on the agenda for the next meeting, Brian. So thank you for stimulating that.
Okay, thanks, Jo. Brian, and thank you for the questions. I think we've stimulated some thought and conversation. So really appreciate you taking the time to prepare them. Anything else you want to add before I close?
Thanks, yeah. I think cultural time, what you've demonstrated by bringing the public in this way is exactly that culture. So thank you for choosing, it's a choice to choose that approach. In terms of the raising, you're absolutely right. So it's very interesting on raising health through stakeholder engagement group, and it's an area that we're very, very keen on. What you just explained is not my experience when I speak about women. That's again one of the issues coming out of the conversation with them, because I think we need a different approach to this really, and they've done so. We will then look at that in October on a national perspective, but their voices are not what arm and arm and arm. What is, we don't see tangible benefits, differences, action. We just hear the same again, let's hear your voices. So that's constructive, honest. In terms of the declaration of interest, conflict of interest, really, I think we need to be sharper on that, locally and nationally. I've absolutely heard what you said. Sometimes that's not my experience at all. We'll go into anything further on that, it's been registered with Gloucestershire already. Thanks, Jo, really, for that reply. And also thanks to that minister and saying that we're working there. That again is what demonstrates to me on the contrary report. There's great words on this, but it's the actions that matter. Thank you to the people who welcome me to the board today as well, really. Other bits or whatever, I'll send it to you to get because I want to share it in. Really
Thanks, Ben. Your questions at last will provoke some conversation. I think today, which I know Rossi will take away, and between Rossi and Jo and others, there's a huge amount of work going on there. It needs to make a difference. We know that. But yeah, thank you. Okay, I've got one item of AOB. Siobhan?
Thanks, Chair. Is that on? Can you hear me? I'll speak very loud. There we go. That's better. So I'm the Director of Public Health at Gloucestershire County Council. I've just spoken with Jeff as the Chair to say that we wanted to just update the board and those watching that there was a decision by the Minister for Housing, Communities and Local Government on the 16th of July about the outcome for local government reorganisation in the Gloucestershire area. Two of those proposals were for two unitary authorities, and one of the proposals was for a single unitary authority. The Minister has confirmed that Gloucestershire will head towards a single unitary authority on the county footprint, and that will be all 7 councils in the Gloucestershire area forming that single unitary area. Just to acknowledge that isn't necessarily the decision that everybody in the area wanted, but all 7 leaders and chief executives working now to implement that decision. There'll be an election to a council, which will sit alongside the 7 councils in May next year. And that council will that shadow council will run for a year, and the vesting day of the new Gloucestershire Council, that's what it will be called, Gloucestershire Council, on the 1st of April 2020. 8. So that gives you a bit of a timeline for where we're headed. So just wanted to update you, and clearly we'll continue to work really closely with ICB partners.
Thanks, Siobhan, and that would make Gloucestershire Council one of the biggest in the country, wouldn't it?
Yeah, I think we're 4 or 5, depending on how the other areas have split out. Yeah.
So, yeah, good. Okay, lovely. Thank you very much. Any other AOB from anybody? Any other items? No, okay. Thank you very much for your contributions this morning. It's been really helpful. Go out and enjoy the sun as much as you can. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair.